Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining us. I'm so pleased to see so many people introducing themselves in the chat. I'm Jen Lawless, the Operations Director, and I believe we are ready to begin. Also with me today, you'll hear from me, Jen Lawless. You'll also be hearing from Sarah Glidden, the CIP Program Manager. We have a team managing the Q&A and chat as well. And they are Charles Baldwin, who works on our Universal Participation Program, Kaylin King, Cheyenne Compostel, and Michael Ibrahim, who are all part of our CIP program. Today's plan is to give you a little bit of an overview, which I will do, and then we'll dive into eligibility. We'll have a chance to look at the application. We'll go over the timeline, and there'll be time for questions. I believe we are asking you to put all of your questions in the Q&A versus the chat. And if you are not sure how to do that, you can ask Charles in the chat for help. And we did want to also say this is meant to be supplemental information to what's already published in both the guidelines for the program on our website and the FAQs. So this isn't a substitute for that. This is just in addition. It's another way to take in information, but you'll have lots of resources between this recording, the website, and the FAQs, and program staff who can answer questions via email and phone. So just a brief overview. We're really excited about the opportunity to take part in this program. So this program, the Cultural Organization Economic Recovery Program, is a $10 million program that's part of the Baker-Polito Economic Recovery Plan. So this is one small piece of the larger plan for the state. And the funding comes from a federal source. It's the CARES Act money. So this is a Baker-Polito program, but we're able to work in partnership with the administration. So we are administering it, the Mass Cultural Council, in partnership with the Executive Office of Housing and Economic Development, EOHED. So we have a lot of relationships with cultural organizations, so it was a nice fit to be able to administer this program on behalf of EOHED. And the intent of the program is to help nonprofit cultural organizations who have been adversely impacted by the pandemic. And of the 10 million total, 2 million is dedicated to small organizations, which was actually a component that was in the FY20 COVID supplemental budget approved by the legislature. Now for this program, when we say small organizations, what we mean is organizations with 10 or fewer FTEs, that's full-time equivalent employees. And if you're not sure how many FTEs you have or how to calculate it, the great news is we have resources in the frequently asked questions that can guide you in calculating your FTEs to figure out if you are going to fall under this small organization bucket. There's a few differences between what small organizations can do versus those with more than 10 FTEs.
Hi, this is Sarah Glidden. I'm Program Manager for the Cultural Investment Portfolio, which I know many of you organizations are funded by that. First of all, just want to make it clear that you do not have to be a current grantee of the Mass Cultural Council to apply to this program. That's a question I've gotten a couple of times. And throughout our conversation this afternoon, Charles and Cheyenne and Michael are going to be addressing some of your questions, but if there's something that we really need to address right in the moment, Charles might just break right in and tell us to answer your questions. So we're going to do our best to help make sure that information builds on other information for you. So first of all, program eligibility. Massachusetts cultural organizations, that's clear enough. These are organizations that have a mission which is primarily concerned with the arts, humanities, or interpretive sciences. And I'm just really drawing your attention to that primarily. If you're an organization that has a different primary function but uses arts and culture or does some arts programming, that is not going to be an eligible application and you're not going to do well with this. You have to offer cultural programs in Massachusetts, and you have to maintain year-round operations in Massachusetts. And just to make sure it's really clear, when we say year-round operations, we are not meaning that you have to do programming 12 months out of the year, but there is an organization that functions and answers questions and, you know, receives the mail and pays the bills. There is an organization that is operating in Massachusetts. You have to have 501c3 status, which is currently active. And I got an email earlier today from someone whose 501c3 status had lapsed and they're working to get it back, but they don't have it back yet. So if they don't have it by December 11th, which is the application deadline, they're not going to be eligible. So it has to be currently active. You have to be in operation or have an intent to reopen. We know a lot of organizations have had to close down operations during the pandemic and plan to reopen as soon as the health situation allows them to do so. You might not know what that date is, but you do know that you plan to reopen, and that is sufficient. You don't have to have a specific date in mind. You just have to have the intent of reopening. And you have to have been incorporated prior to June 30th of 2019. So this is where we start getting into the tricky stuff. First of all, to be eligible, you have to document that you lost revenue due to COVID-19, and you lost that revenue between the dates of March 10th, 2020 and December 31st in 2020. So you're projecting to the end of the year as well. The amount that you have lost has to be equal to or greater than the amount that you request in this program. And you can do this really simply. If you have your finances in QuickBook or something, you can run a comparison of your 2019 versus your 2020 revenues for the same time period and see where your losses are. And then you should understand what specific activities and programs created that loss. So we're not asking you to attach documentation for your losses to this application. However, you might be asked for it in the future. So you need to keep a record of how you calculated the dollar amount that you put into the application. And that dollar amount reflects both earned and contributed income. So this could be revenue from classes or performances or exhibitions that you had to cancel, or rentals or festivals, any of those events. This could be revenue that you lost because of fundraising events, whether they were galas or in-person events, or whether they were mailings that you weren't able to do, or because of the COVID situation, did not yield as you would hope they would. This is about your organizational closures. Maybe you weren't able to allow folks into your building or run your educational programs. This could be about lost sales or rentals or vendor fees from markets. So all the different sources of revenue that you have feed into this. And it doesn't need to be in consecutive months. At this point, you are simply looking at the period from March 10th through the end of the calendar year, and you're comparing last year to this year. So easier than it could be. So that's the first part of the eligibility. Secondly, we do have organizations that are not eligible. We want to really call this out very clearly for you. If you are a for-profit organization, you are not eligible for funds through this program. If you are an individual or an unincorporated organization, perhaps you're working with a fiscal agent, those are not eligible in this program. If your organization's primary mission, and again, I'm really drawing attention to that word primary, if your primary mission is not arts, humanities, or interpretive sciences, you will not be eligible in this program. Colleges, universities, private, nonprofit, secondary schools, not eligible, and that includes arts and culture programs that exist underneath the umbrella of a college. So just for a comparison moment, in our cultural investment portfolio, we do support organizations that have a college parent organization, things like college art museums. Those organizations are not eligible in this program. And also municipal organizations are not eligible in this program. I'm going to kick it back to Jen. Jen is going to talk about there we go.
Sorry, I hit my mute button when you unmuted me, so I muted myself. So this slide, I just wanted to pause and talk about eligibility versus preference, because there has been some confusion about these two components. So we wanted to make it really clear. So what we just covered was eligibility. So this is if you are even eligible or able to submit an application to the program. So if you meet everything we've discussed so far, it would mean you're eligible. So then the next component that I'm going to walk through is this idea of preference. So once we have all the applications submitted, we assume that the request will exceed the demand. And so preference is a way to determine how the funding gets awarded using a point system. So I'm just going to walk through the preferences. So one of the preferences is given to organizations whose primary mission is presenting, promoting, and or preserving the cultural traditions, art, history, and creative expression of people of color, women, people with disabilities, veterans, immigrants, people who are LGBTQIA, and members of other historically underrepresented and underfunded groups, or organizations whose primary mission is advancing and or supporting artists who are people of color, women, people with disabilities, veterans, LGBTQIA, and members of other underrepresented and underfunded groups. So again, this is for preference in terms of funding. This is not eligibility. And just to kind of give you an example of what we'll be looking for in a mission, I'll just use the Mass Cultural Council's mission as an example. Our mission is to promote excellence, education, diversity, and inclusion in the arts, humanities, and sciences to foster a rich cultural life for all Massachusetts residents. So you can see while we focus on diversity and inclusion and equity, we're saying we're serving all residents. So we're for all. So our mission wouldn't actually meet this. So you're really going to be organizations whose primary mission is to promote traditional Cambodian dance, or you know, supporting contemporary Black artists, or you know, primarily focused on women composers. So your mission should really speak to the community that's underrepresented or underfunded. The other preferences, so preferences given to organizations who have not been able to reopen or not reopen fully, organizations that haven't received other federal aid. If you have received other federal aid, like PPP, or eligible to apply, it's just those organizations that have gotten no federal aid or little federal aid will be given preference over those who've gotten multiple sources of federal aid. Organizations that own or lease and operate a facility are given preference, and organizations in gateway cities, under-resourced rural towns, state designated cultural districts, a BID district, it's a business improvement district. There are very few of those. There are, I think, 6 in the state, or a transformative development initiative district. Information about all those types of things can be found in the FAQs. If you're not sure if your organization is in one of those, you can look for more information on the FAQs. So again, so there's going to be some points awarded based on these preferences in terms of how we distribute the funding. But just to reiterate, preferences are not eligibility requirements. If you're eligible, you should submit. If you have some of these components, it'll just be part of the scoring.
Hi, Sarah Glidden again. I want to actually go through the application requirements. And at the end of this session, after a brief Q&A, I'm going to open up the actual application and walk through it online. So you'll get a chance to see the application and let me talk about the elements of the application with that application right in front of us. So first of all, the application lives on a website outside of the Mass Cultural Council website. And here is the URL for it. There is a link for that on the application page on our website. If you're an organization that has applied to local cultural councils, Just a reminder that this is a different website. So your existing username and password from the local cultural council applications will not get you into this program. You'll have to start a new user profile. If, however, you have applied to the Cultural Facilities Fund, the Gateway Program, the Projects Program, the UP program, this website will be familiar and you already have a user profile. The deadline for this application with all of your attachments attached to the application is December 11th, 2020 at 11:59 p.m. So 1 second before midnight, this system will shut down. And if you have not finished your application and submitted it to us, it will be too late. So the program shuts down, and at that point, there is no exceptions to it. You must include in this application your 2019 IRS Form 990 or 990EZ. And this is both a requirement of the application and an indication of eligibility. Your 2019 IRS Form 990, it's your tax form, and it's what gives us your income and expenses from the previous year, which is part of how your eligibility is verified. So if you've been filing a 990N, which in Massachusetts is only organizations with less than $5,000 in revenue, a 990N is not going to count for eligibility to this program. If, because of COVID-19, your accountant hasn't been able to finish your 2019 990 and you've only got your 2018, you can submit your 2018 form instead. Do not, please do not submit your 2020 form. The reason we're asking for this form, again, is to support your expenses and income for a year that was not impacted by the COVID-19 pandemic. So if you give us your 2020, you are giving us a form that is showing the impact of COVID-19, and that's not what we want in this particular part of the application. Also, you're going to need to attach a PDF that is a documentation of the expenses that you are going to use this money to pay for. So I'm going to go into that in a little more detail. It does need to be expenses that occurred between March 10th of 2020 and December 31st. So something you paid in January isn't going to count, but the bills that you've gotten and the people you've paid after March 10th, all of that falls into this category. It needs to be one PDF. There's only place for one PDF to be attached to the application. So if you've never combined multiple documents into a PDF, you've got about 11 days to learn how to do that. So tap into friends who have greater computer skills or Google how to do this. You might be able to do this on an app on a smartphone, or possibly you might have to get to a scanner to scan the documents. But we are looking for you to provide the documentation for the actual things that you have spent money on. And finally, applications that are late, incomplete, or incorrect will not be funded. So please, everything needs to be there. Also, applications that are sent to us by snail mail. These applications do have to be submitted through the online portal. So the application, biggest question we get is how much can an organization apply for? Well, first of all, the cap on this program is $100,000. You can apply for whatever is less, $100,000 or the equivalent of 3 months of your supported expenses from the 2019 IRS Form 990. So what we mean here is, let's say you are not a small organization. So you are, in comparison, I guess, a large organization. Standard applications, you can apply for support based on your occupancy expenses. I'll give you a little more detail about that, and your personnel expenses that are employee related. So not your independent contractors, but your employees. So this would be payroll, insurance, benefits, etc. So And of course, this is all based on your 2019 FTEs. So if you look at your 2019 Form 990 and you take those personnel costs and those occupancy costs and take 25% of them, because 25% would be equal to a 3-month average, that dollar amount becomes the cap for what you can apply for. If that is less than $100,000, then that's the amount you can apply for. If that amount is more than $100,000, you can apply for $100,000. Now, if you are a small organization, and that means 10 or fewer full-time equivalent employees, you can use all of your expenses, not just the personnel and occupancy costs, but all of your operating expenses. So your program expenses, your printing, your copier lease, everything except capital expenditures. What can you spend the grant on? This is the final part about how you determine what you can apply for. You have to provide documentation for the expenses that this grant will pay for, and only expenses through December 31st are eligible. Again, for organizations with more than 10 full-time equivalent employees, and again, that's using the 2019 employees levels, not your current ones, because we realize a lot of organizations have done substantial layoffs or did not hire people because programs didn't run. But if you're an organization that has more than 10 FTEs, the expenses are payroll, benefit costs, current mortgage payments and mortgage interest, rent, utilities, and interest on other debt obligations. And again, for organizations with 10 or fewer FTEs, you can use these grant funds on any of your operating expenses, except for a list of excluded or prohibited expenses that is on our website and in the FAQ. So I'm not going to go through them here, but you can take a look at that. And that includes capital expenditures and things of that sort. You do have to provide actual documentation for what you spent the money on. So if going back to what you spent on eligible expenses and what your lost revenue was, if you determined that you can apply for $100,000, but because in this particular year you did such substantial cutbacks of your activities that you don't have $100,000 of eligible expenses to document for your application, then your application is going to be for that smaller amount. It's going to be for the amount that you can actually document with proof of expenditures. And actually, let me just go back. Notice there that if you received PPP money, that was for paying occupancy costs and personnel costs, you cannot use those same costs for this program. They've already been paid for by one federal aid program. They cannot be paid for by a second federal aid program. So please make a point of really looking at that information. We get a lot of questions about what counts as documentation of these expenses. Well, a couple of things that could count we've got here. For example, for personnel costs, and again, if you're a larger organization, personnel is only your W-2 employees. You could attach your IRS Form 941, which is the document that you use to submit your quarterly taxes to the IRS. That identifies how much you paid in payroll and also how much you paid in payroll taxes. If you have payroll statements from your payroll company, assuming that you're using an outside sourced payroll company, that would be eligible. If you are doing your payroll internally, you can run an internal payroll report through your accounting system. You can use invoices from insurance providers. You can use other statements that show that you paid for salaries and benefits, like I said, from your own internal accounting system. Please obscure people's social security numbers if this is something that you're running for us. We do not want to have that kind of personal information for anybody. Payments made to independent contractors are not eligible. For occupancy costs, mortgage payments, lease statements, utility bills, bank statements that show interest on debt. All of those could be supporting statements. Again, if you're that small organization with 10 or fewer full-time equivalents, you can use bills or invoices for anything that you are paying for, as long as it's not on that prohibited list. And again, make one PDF of all the documentation and attach it to the application. And I did notice flying by in the chat, one of our attendees has mentioned a free software that allows you to do that. So thank you to that person. I'm betting it's going to get a lot of additional use in this next week and a half. And finally, an area that has prompted a lot of questions is this possibility of a grant as large as $500,000 for extraordinary need. And first of all, I want to make it clear that this is on an extremely limited basis. Might be very few, might not be any, but the administration thought that we should reserve the right to do this if there was extreme justification and extreme need. Couple of things beyond the standard application that everyone else is doing. If you think that this is you, you need to clearly articulate the extraordinary need. There is a place on the application, a text box, where you can explain what is so distinctly different about your need from everyone else's. You need to demonstrate more than $500,000 in lost revenue. And let us just acknowledge that we know that the lost revenue in this sector has been enormous, and probably half the people listening in today or more can show that they have $500,000 in lost revenue. So we know that there is great need. You do have to demonstrate 3 months of supported operating expenses of at least $500,000. And here's the place where it's really different. And I just want to draw very clear attention to this. You need to provide invoices or other supporting documentation for your eligible expenses of at least $500,000 in expenses incurred in any 3-month period between March 10th of 2020 and December 31st of 2020. So unlike the expenses that you document if you are looking for the grant that's capped at $100,000, which is all of the expenses that you have incurred in this year that were not covered by PPP money. For this particular category, it has to be a specific 3-month period. You have to say, this is July, August, and September, October, November, December, 3 specific concurrent months with expenses that exceed $500,000. And again, a reminder about the PPP money. If you received that, and particularly if you extended the period that you used that throughout the fall, you might find that although you've had substantial expenditures and losses, that you don't meet this bar of $500,000, because the things that you paid for with the PPP money will not be eligible for this particular program. So a timeline for this program, again, the application is open right now. There's the website, mass.gosmart.org. There are applications, there are links on our website to this application. And the application deadline, December 11th at 1 second before midnight Eastern time. So if you just happen to be in Guam or something, that is not going to help you here. It does have to be midnight Eastern time. We are going to be spending the holiday season reviewing applications and getting everything ready so that award notifications and contracts can be emailed in very early January. I know we have a goal of doing this extremely early in January, and just a call out here to be particularly careful in your application. We're going to be emailing these contracts to you. And if there's a typo in your email address, which happens, you won't receive it. So please really proofread your application very carefully. There's a deadline to return the contracts by mail. It's a signed contract. We have to have it in our hands January 19th. So Do not sit on this. Get it back to us as quickly as possible. And once we've got the contracts, we will start dispersing the funds aligned with the Commonwealth's fiscal systems, which can be a little cumbersome. Just want to make sure that the eligible expenses, again, that you're reporting on this, are all expenses that have happened between March 10th and December 31st. And that's whether you're applying for the amount that's capped at $100,000 or whether you are applying for the extraordinary need. So I'm going to pause for a second, and I'm going to see how effectively I can change over to the application without sharing everything with you. And in the meantime, I'm going to ask Charles to take a look at the questions in the Q&A that have not been answered through luck and hopefully careful planning, and see what we can answer for you. And then I'll launch into the application. Oh, and just a final reminder, we've got a fabulous staff that is here working to support this process. You've met me, you've met Jen, the rest of the CIP team, Cheyenne, Kaylin, and Michael. A lot of you know them because they are your staff contacts if you have a CIP grant. A lot of folks that you never get to see, but are the backbone of our operations. Cindy Gavilio, who is our contracts officer. Scott Hufford, who is our information systems coordinator, and Evelyn Nellum, who is our grant operation officer. And I'm going to unmute all of my colleagues so that they can pepper us with questions.
And so many questions when 500 people are in the meeting. Thank you for everyone's patience.
Okay. Go for it, Charles.
No, I'm scrolling.
Okay.
So there are certainly lots of questions about the timing. And one question that I didn't know the answer to was, when reviewing the 3 months during the last 9 months, do those months need to be consecutive?
If you are talking about the, again, this is the $100,000 cap, they do not have to be 3 consecutive months. It is 3 months, the equivalent of 3 months of expenses. So look at your fiscal 19, 990. If it was 500,000 of expenses eligible in fiscal 19, then 25% of that becomes your cap for this.
And another question that a few people have asked, which is, but I'm just going to read this one, and I think it will reflect on what a few other people have asked. We have lost more than 150K from programs and gala income, but we also cut our staff hours to make up for the loss. Can we show the loss of income rather than to cover the expenses, since we have cut so much of our payroll?
So the fact that you've cut expenses might decrease the amount that you can apply for. Like I said, it's, first of all, just can my colleagues flag for me whether or not you can now see the application on the Zoom screen?
Yes, we can.
Fabulous, thank you. So there's the start of eligibility, which is, did you lose money? There's the maximum amount you can ask for, which is how much is 3 months worth of your expenses from the previous fiscal year. And then finally, your actual application amount is going to be capped at what you can substantiate through your documented expenses. So yes, an organization that has substantially decreased operations, if you've decreased operations below that threshold of what your 3 months of expenses were, then your application is going to be less than the 3 months. Hope that helps.
Hi, Sarah. This is Michael here. I
Mhm.
think it might be helpful to just go through the application because we're getting many questions that I think will become evident once we walk through.
Okay. Well, so when you log into our friend, the Go Smart system, you're going to see this page. You want to choose current programs and applications, and that's going to give you a list of any programs that are currently open in some way. And here we are with the Cultural Organization Economic Recovery Program. When we start it, this is what it looks like. You can see it's an elegantly designed program. It starts off with questions that relate to eligibility so that we can help you identify early on whether or not it is a good use of your time to continue this. I'm just going to point out here a little language here. Click Save Work at the bottom of the screen. It's incredibly important. This program does not save your work. So if you do not click Save, it will not be saved and you will be very sad. So again, some very straightforward questions that relate to, are you located in Massachusetts? Are you a 501c3, etc. We talked about this briefly. Is the mission of your organization primarily focused on the arts, humanities, or interpretive sciences? You see this little blue question mark here? That's a link that will give you a little additional information whenever you see it. So in this case, this gives you a more in-depth definition of arts, humanities, and interpretive sciences. For example, arts refer to the creation of work in the crafts and performing, visual, media, folk, design, literary, and interdisciplinary arts. In addition, they include the presentation and preservation of and education about works in these disciplines. And again, this is about your primary mission being in the arts, humanities, or interpretive sciences. Again, eligibility questions. Did you maintain year-round operations? Can you document that you lost revenue? Are you currently open or do you have plans to reopen? And if you said no to any of those, you are not eligible and you are done. Then we have the additional questions that address eligibility about whether you might be a for-profit or a municipality or an unincorporated association, etc. Will funding be used for expenses already reimbursed or paid for by other aid? And do you plan on using this funds for capital costs? All of that, if you said yes to those, again, that will affect your eligibility. And please save your work.
And just
Yeah.
read carefully, because the system, if you answer one of those questions wrong and you're ineligible, the system's still going to let you get to the next page. So
yeah,
just be really careful, because later on down the line, if you indicate that you're ineligible based on an answer there, you know, we have to kind of take the answer you provided, even if it was an accident. So I just be really thoughtful and careful when you get through that page, because whether you are ineligible or eligible, it's going to allow you to get to the next page of the application.
Okay. So again, straightforward, the name of the organization, your address, city and town. Okay, so we've got gateway towns. And continuing on through that, nothing here that should be a surprise. Again, please pay attention to typos. I've definitely run across typos in people's applications in the past, and we would hate for that to be something that makes it difficult to reach you. So now we've got more information about you. What is your mission? Straightforward, plug in your mission here. And then in this box, link to your mission for us. If it's on your website, which is a great place for your mission to be, just give us that URL. Is the mission of your organization primarily focused on, and this is what Jen was talking about, the preference points? Yes, no. And we do mean that it needs to be in your mission. If this is something that is so important to you, that is your focus for operations, then for this purpose, we believe that would be in your mission statement. And then a little more information that helps us identify exactly how you meet this. When was your organization incorporated? Straightforward date. Do you operate a cultural facility? Many of our organizations do not. This, again, these are not eligibility issues. These are guidance for those preference points. And then this one, which is important to us, in 2019, how many FTEs were maintained? And the best thing to look at here is your 2019 IRS reporting. How many people did you report as W-2 employees, either full-time, part-time, seasonal, temporary, all of those. And there's a fabulous calculator that is linked to in the FAQ.
And just to flag, if you have 0 FTEs, you would select 10 FTEs or less, because you, again, this is preference, it's not eligibility. So if you have no FTEs, just select that first one.
We definitely have folks applying who do not have any staff that is paid as employees. They might be all volunteer, or they might only be some 1099 folks. Again, the economic development initiatives, the cultural districts, the BID, the transformative development initiatives, all of those, or none of the above. And again, just to reiterate, not a requirement, but a preference point. Okay, our friend Evelyn has very clearly given you some guidance here about using this system. Because it doesn't save unless you hit the button save, we really encourage you, anything that is text, draft it in another program and then copy it and paste it into this, because people have definitely closed documents and not realized it didn't save anything that they wrote. Also, this particular system does not show any sort of special formatting. For example, changes in font sizes or styles or bold, italics or bullets or any of that. So if you put those into your text, they will be saved as a combination of meaningless symbols in the middle of your text. Not an eligibility requirement, but it sure makes it a little harder to read. Click Save at the end of each page. You can also click View PDF and you can see what it looks like. Make sure that it looks the way you meant for it to look when you submit it to us. And any place you've got questions, the help icon or the FAQ will help you. And just to point out here that the little red asterisk indicates a question that you must answer. Again, simple as a drop-down menu telling us which phase you are. And if you aren't sure which phase you are, again, in our FAQ, we do have a link to the Commonwealth of Massachusetts definitions of each phase of reopening in recovery. This question, again, it's a drop-down. We have not reopened our in-person public programming. We've partly reopened, but not to the fullest extent allowed. We've opened to the fullest extent allowed, or we have fully reopened our in-person public programming to pre-pandemic levels. Here's where you address the economic impact, how COVID-19 has caused a loss of revenue. And this would be a place where you could say, we had to cancel our summer theatrical season, or our museum was closed for 10 weeks, or we had to cancel our music classes, whatever the issue is that caused your loss of revenue. This is where you explain it. And then here you put that dollar amount. And you should put the true dollar amount. Don't cap it at $100,000. You can tell us the truth here of the dollar amount, knowing that the cap of the application will still be that $100,000. These are a variety of types of federal aid that organizations have received. If you didn't receive any of them, click No Federal COVID-19 Relief has been received. If you did receive something, check off whichever ones are eligible. And a question here about the PPP. If you are an organization that does not yet know whether your PPP will be treated as a grant or as a loan, because it hasn't been forgiven yet, you still check the button, because whether it's a 0% loan or a grant, it is still a form of federal aid. So do check that button. And if there's something that we did not identify on that list that you were funded by, please indicate it here in this box. Okay. So here again, we're reminding you that a copy of your 2019 990 is required to complete the section. And if you don't have the 2019, please give us the 2018. Do not give us the 2020. And again, an indication of the kinds of expenses that are eligible for the determination of what you can apply for. And once you determine what that amount is, again, another lovely drop-down box in $1,000 increments, you simply pick your spot. And if you are one of those organizations that is flagging the extraordinary need of $500,000, go for $500,000. Just to reassure anybody, this is not a situation where you have to choose. If you put $500,000 and it is determined that your organization will not receive that, you are still in the pool for the amount capped at $100,000. So it's not like by identifying the $500,000 you have missed the other opportunity. And this is in the guidelines, but just a word of advice to everyone. We do reserve the right to fund any and all of these applications at less than the amount requested. We know that there's a lot of need, and $10 million will be in demand very quickly. If you are one of those organizations that's applying for the $500,000, this is the place where you answer it. You've got 1,500 characters. This is definitely a place where I encourage you to draft your text in a word processing document and then paste it in here. Very important. And here is where you attach your file, your PDF of your 990. Moving on. So this is the page where you actually provide your receipts or invoices or proof of payments. These are the expenses. And again, if you are an organization with more than 10 FTEs, that's occupancy costs and expenses related to W-2 in personnel. If you are an organization with 10 or fewer, this is basically any of the expenses that you have, except for these prohibited expenses. So these things are things that you cannot include even if you are one of the small organizations. So subgranting or regranting to other organizations or to individuals, construction costs, major equipment purchases, lobbying. This is one where we've gotten some questions about compensation to foreign nationals. This is not just any foreign national. This is in compliance with U.S. Treasury Department Office of Foreign Assets Control. We do have a link to that in our FAQ. The federal government has identified specific situations where those foreign nationals are not eligible for federal funds. I'm not going to try to identify who they are because I don't know what the countries are or what the circumstances are. But if you go to our FAQ and click on that link, you will get the definition and the detail that will be a guidance for you. And if you are not one of those organizations, then not a concern. And in this section, we want you to describe what it is that you have attached in your PDF. Now, you don't need to identify, payroll for employee 1, payroll for employee 2. It could be, we've attached our IRS Form 941 for the second and third quarters of 2020. We have attached copies of all of our invoices from our health insurance or other benefits providers. So you can provide a definition that is somewhat encompassing of whatever attachments you're giving to us. And then once you get past the first expenses are all about employees, and then it's about occupancy. So rent or mortgage expenses, if you're renting that, if it's mortgage, and give us a subtotal. If utilities, again, you don't need to say electric bill for June, electric bill for July. You can simply say electric bills, water bills, internet, whatever the utilities are, not utilities, I'm sorry, not internet, but basic utilities for the property, give us a description and put them there. If you've got debt, this is where you identify what debt you're paying and how you're proving it. So if it's a line of credit, for example, it's the bank statements that show the interest you've paid. And all of that here, if you're one of those larger organizations, should equal the amount that you're requesting, because that's where your eligible expenses stop. If you're one of the small organizations, you can provide documentation of other operating expenses. So again, you've got some boxes here to describe, broadly the types of expenses you've attached and what all of that is. And then when you get down here to the grand total, that amount is what your application is truly for. You've got to upload the supporting documentation. And again, there's only place here for one document. So merge them together. We're all going to develop skills in merging PDFs. And the duplication of benefits. Again, this is just an explanation that if you've gotten funds from another federally supported source that are paying for these expenses, then you can't tap into this particular federal source. If you've gotten unrestricted donations, God bless them, the people who support you have written you checks for unrestricted operating support, and you've used that funding to manage your expenses right now, that's great. This federal money can actually be addressed as the funds that supported those expenses. So it frees up that unrestricted operating support. But you cannot duplicate what you've paid for with other federal funds. So we are asking you to verify that you have read this and that you understand this. If you somehow should be audited or we are audited, this would be a concern. And oh, look, you can see that I didn't answer any of those questions. So the system is telling me I need to go back and answer all of them. So I'm sure we've got more questions. My friend Charles.
Hey, hello, this is Charles.
Hi.
I am still here. And I believe Michael and Cheyenne are also on this.
Okay.
I'm looking through because I believe that going through did answer a lot of questions.
Great.
And this may have been it, but I thought it was an interesting one. If we are a mass corporate 501c3, but also have historic sites in other New England states, do we have to back out expenses from non-mass sites?
That is an excellent question. If we can identify who it was who asked that, or if one of my colleagues can address that. It's not a question that's popped up before. But my expectation is if you are an organization, Dave or Jen, you head me off here if I'm going in the wrong direction. But my belief is that if you are an organization headquartered in Massachusetts and you do programming in Massachusetts, then your organization is eligible for this support. And we have not asked organizations to back out expenses that took place elsewhere for any other purposes. So I don't think that's going to be the case here.
Can you define, Sarah, this is Cheyenne, can you give a little bit more information on the documentation of expenses that would be eligible?
Can you give me a little more focus?
Well, there are questions like to document phone bills. Would I have to submit 10 phone bills over the period? Can I use information from QuickBooks, or does it have to be invoices? What kind of documentation is it?
I've got you. I would say QuickBooks is the use of last resort, since that is entirely your own personal documentation and not anything externally verifiable. So if this is something where external bills exist, such as a bill from the phone company, then you should attach the phone bills. Now, you don't need to, my goodness, my phone bill, I think, is 15 pages, it looks like. The cover page that has the total owed for the month would be sufficient. But yes, if you are including 10 phone bills worth of expenses as part of your documented expenses, then you need all 10 of them in there, scanned and included.
And
And a follow-up to that is we've had a couple questions about how do you document eligible expenses between the application submission date and the end of the calendar year.
Yes. So in that case, obviously, some sort of internal documentation would be allowed. And I would say it'd be great if
we're going to probably, within 45 days, if you're approved for a grant, within 45 days, we're going to request the external documentation. So you have to be able to provide it at that time.
So just to follow up on that, let's say you do a bi-weekly payroll and you can't include your final payroll of the year because it hasn't happened yet. You know how much it's going to be. You could attach you could include in your PDF a memo stating our additional documentation will include the payroll for the final 2-week pay period of calendar 2020. And if you get this grant, we're going to come after you and ask for that.
Yeah. And then Sarah, just to circle back to the previous question, I think the one thing we would need to just look into a little bit more before we can give the final answer is for this list of expenditures that you're applying it to. I believe so rent or mortgage payments are an eligible expenditure to apply the funds to. I believe that might have to be only for the Massachusetts.
Yes.
And that does make sense.
Yeah, yeah.
So-
This is Dave Slattery, and I would say yes. We'll check and dot the i's and cross the t's. But we are a Massachusetts state agency using Massachusetts money, trying to support Massachusetts nonprofits. So it would behoove everyone to back out to purely your Massachusetts expenses.
Okay. Great. And we can add that to our FAQ as well.
There's some questions about the 3-month period versus the March 10th to December 31st period, if you can designate those for us.
Okay, so
And
picking a specific 3-month period, for example, saying these are our eligible expenses for July, August, and September, and they exceed $500,000. Picking a specific 3-month period only applies if you are one of those organizations that is being asked, is asking to be considered for the $500,000 amount. For everyone else, you're using 25% of your fiscal 19 expenses as a baseline for the eligibility. So look at again, really easy to look at them on your 990, whether it's occupancy costs or personnel costs. Those are all called out as specific line items on your 990. So take those numbers, multiply them by 25%, which is the equivalent of 3 months out of 12. And that's going to give you your absolute maximum that you can apply for, either that or the $100,000, whichever is less.
And I know it is confusing because there's 3 ways that this period of time of either 3 months or March 10th to December 31st comes into play, because it's both how you calculate your grant amount, which Sarah was just talking about. When you're looking at your 990, you can request a quarter of the expenses that you identified there as those supported expenses. And then when it comes to spending the money, most organizations can pick how they're going to spend the money on items that took place between March 10th and December 31st. But the extraordinary need, 500,000 applicants have to pick 3 months within that range to say how they're going to spend 500,000. So it is really confusing. And so if you're not sure, you can always reach out to us individually.
Absolutely.
So that's the other message, is call and email. If you're leaving this and it's 5 o'clock and you're hungry and your head's spinning, we're there after the fact to answer like really detailed questions before you hit submit, so you feel confident.
Also, if you're one of those small organizations, when we talk about general operating expenses, we really mean everything that you are spending money on except big capital equipment. So if you are the small organization, the 10 or fewer FTEs, when you are submitting your expenses, that can include your 1099 contractors, that can include, you know, cleaning service maybe. Anyway,
For calculating your amount of
Yeah.
your 3 month, your look back to calculate what you're eligible for your.
Yeah. For the small organizations, it's everything. It's not just people or occupancy costs. It's everything. And when we talk about personnel costs for the larger organizations, it's only the W-2 folks. It's not the 1099 contractors.
This is Charles again, and I just want to give a shout out to the folks who, there are 123 open questions. A lot of them are repeated. Some have been answered in the conversation and going through the application process. But keeping track of them, anyway, I'm putting this out there as a reach out to us after the fact if we were unable to get to your question, just because honestly, I'm having a hard time keeping track of new questions and what got answered.
Well, I'm hoping I can save the Q&A from this and then flag anything where I can add things to the FAQ. And I also want to do a special thank you and shout out to our captioner, Carla, who is flying fingers over here. So thank you so much for your work on our behalf. I do see a question about the EIDL funds and whether that's a duplicate. Yes, that just like the PPP, if it was a loan, it still counts as federal funds that you receive. And
Sarah, maybe we want to put that other screen up that has your email as people will be wanting to follow up.
Because we are just past 5 o'clock.
sure. You know, we love talking to folks. So did I put my, okay, there it is at the very bottom. Can you see that?
Yes.
Great. My email is Sarah, S-A-R-A. There's no H on that. S-A-R-A .glidden, G-L-I-D-D-E-N @art.state.ma.us. Our emails are also, all of our emails are on the staff page of the Mass Cultural Council website. And there's a link to me on the page for this program. So there are lots of ways to find us, and we are all over the email these days. So our goal is to help you understand and be successful in this program. Okay, thank you everybody who joined us today, and thank you for the work you do in the Commonwealth, in your communities, with your artists and your organizations. We have great respect and value for the work that you're doing, and we know that it's a painful time for folks. So thank you so much to all of you for the work you do and for being here today. And again, I don't think they're on the line with us, but thank you to the EO-HED folks who have brought us into the process for doing this work. And we'll be around. Again, the application due on the 11th, that's a week from Friday. And we will do our very best to be extremely available to you in answering this.
Yes, this is Charles, a great big thank you to everyone who's asked so many questions. And it's a good reminder that meetings with 500 people are really tough.
Yeah.
So I appreciate your patience as we try to work our way through all these questions.
Yeah, and Oliver, I see you've got a question. I'm going to just address it right now again. If you are one of those organizations with 10 or fewer, then you can use the funds you use to pay contractors. But if you are 10 or if you are more than 10, no, you cannot. Thank you
Thanks.
all.
Thank you, everyone.
Thanks, everybody.